A New Hope, Nier Chapter 52. You can read all of Azazyel's fan-fiction stories by subscribing to patreon.com/Azazyel. I couldn't help but hum in thought seeing the massive flock of Lancer, Nevermore, and what looked to be several Griffons leading the flock of flying Grimm, which were also the focus of the anti-air batteries. Even from the distance, I could tell each of the Lancers was an oversized wasp the size of a small horse armed with a deadly stinger. The Nevermore looked to be just the same as any normal raven besides the glowing red eyes and ranging from the size of normal birds up to what looked to be the size of a semi-truck, with those few chests and heads being lightly armored. The problem seemed to be Griffons, which were plainly a higher tier Grimm, as they didn't seem to be of different sizes and instead were clearly more thickly armored depending on their age, and were capable of shooting balls of lightning or plasma out of their mouths. There were several hundred larger-sized Grimm and countless small Nevermore, trying to push their way in our direction, as this landing platform had several freaking out civilians and was right on the edge of Vale's borders. A few smaller Nevermore seemed to lock onto me as I was walking down towards the larger cloud of flying Grimm, and my sword flew off from beside me and impaled a few of the Nevermore as they attempted to dive bomb me. With their small size maybe, they aren't able to throw those huge sharp feathers like the one in the show did. I mused as I made my sword fly in the air, cutting down the Grimm that approached me, and any that I missed with my sword was electrocuted by a powerful electrical current. I was running around myself. I walked over to one of the larger Nevermore that survived my electrical field, and with a negligent stomp with my Yoar-style boots the Grimm evaporated into black ashes. Their flesh is rather fragile. Let's try the Grimm with bones protecting them. I mused as anti-air batteries paused in their firing, allowing the cloud of Grimm to approach me and the other huntsmen that went ahead of me to get into the thick of the monsters. I couldn't help but think that it was likely the AA guns likely were overheating or needed to reload. But I wasn't worried, seeing there were a solid dozen huntsmen and huntresses cutting through the monsters. Some were obviously using their own semblances to great effects, as one huntress in particular seemed to have a gravity semblance or something that made all the Grimm around her crumple to the ground and augmented her whip with a purple glow which was shattering the bone armor that the Grimm bore with ease. I pointed my palm towards the thicker concentrations of Grimm and began shooting a deluge of small fireballs that would explode with the power of a relatively weak grenade, but the number of exploding fireballs and the fact that flying Grimm were more fragile soon knocked a great number of the flying Grimm onto the ground, much to the delight of the huntsmen that were having to use ammo to bring them down to the ground. "Kid, get back to the bullhead. We got this," an older huntsman ordered from behind me, and I quickly looked back, seeing a dozen people in vibrant clothing running across the Vale's buildings in the distance as they made their way here. "I will just stay here shooting from a distance with my semblance. Don't worry, I won't try to wrestle one of those Griffons," I consoled the man, who shook his head and ran off ahead to dive into the battle armed with a golf club axe. Like, do hunters actually modify their everyday items so they are always armed? I thought before, remembering that yes, there was that one professor that made his coffee jug into a telescopic collapsible club with a flamethrower built into it. Even as I ruminated at the ridiculous weapons of Remnant, I was still paying attention to my surroundings, and with a curse, I threw myself to the side as a huge Lancer smashed into where I was before, and it quickly flew back into the air but locked onto me. The Lancer was the size of a damn elephant, and with it being an insect it was clearly armored in some kind of a carapace that protected its vital organs. My sword flew off from beside me with a shriek of displaced air as I attempted to simply cut off or destroy the wasp's wings. It dashed toward me, but somehow managed to adjust its position so the wing, swinging at hummingbird speeds, dodged with my blade, making a screech as it slashed its exoskeleton, cracking it but not crippling it. "Fuck off," I growled, stamping my feet on the ground. As the Lancer Queen got within a dozen meters of me, the Lancer was smashed to the ground as a large stone hand grew out of the ground beside it and swatted it out of the air from its blind spot, with the stone hand shattering in the process and burying the massive wasp in tons of hardened stone. Note to self: Grimm hardened by bones, or an exoskeleton, are somewhat resistant to blunt damage, I noted dryly as the Lancer Queen made its way out of the pile of stone, but with its exoskeleton and wings destroyed and cracked, I could already see the Grimm was dying as black ashes were flaking off of it and drifting off in the wind. With a wave of my hand, I sent my sword straight into the head of the Grimm, and it exploded into a pile of smoke as my sword instantly killed it by destroying its brain. But I noticed something. A small amount of the ashes from the Grimm seemed to have been blown by the wind and seemed to merge with me, but didn't seem to be doing anything to me from a cursory check. With the Lancer dead, I pulled my sword back to me and just watched the battle in the distance, only taking action to shoot a couple of fireballs at any Grimm that escaped the violent purging that was several huntsmen slaughtering the Grimm. "So, you are one of my prospective students," a cultured male voice said from behind me, and I whirled around with my sword already floating between me, pointing at the voice between me and the source of the voice. "Ah, Headmaster and Mrs. Goodwitch. Yes, I have come to join Beacon to become a huntsman," I said as my sword returned to my side, and I looked at the duo who managed to sneak up behind me. First of all, was the grey-haired Professor Ojban that was sipping from a coffee mug with a light smile as he stared at me, and beside him was the blonde and voluptuous Glinda Goodwitch that acted as the vice principal/headmistress of Beacon. "You don't seem to focus on using your weapon directly in combat," Goodwitch noted with a raised eyebrow as she seemed to study me, and I nodded. "Yes, my semblance is a bit odd, but I typically use it, with some dust hidden in my clothes to control the battlefield from a safe distance," I said proudly, and she smiled in agreement as she herself relied entirely on her telekinesis semblance to do battle, but she was capable of both macro and micro telekinesis, being able to use it to fix stuff as well as throw large boulders and trees into Grimm with impunity. "Well, in that case I look forward to seeing you in Beacon. Now get back to the bullheads, it's about to take off with the Grimm having been cleared out," Goodwitch ordered, and I nodded in assent, leaving the battlefield and going back to a bullhead that still had seats. As I sat down in the bullhead meditating, I could feel my connection to my guardian grow far deeper, and I realized something. Grimm essence feeds my guardian, which in turn makes my connection back to the Near Earth stronger. I thought before realizing that my plans in bringing them here were no longer going to take half a year at best. I would be able to bring Yoarha androids safely here with some stuff to stabilize a portal within merely a month or two should I kill enough Grimm. "Well, looks like becoming a huntsman is truly the best plan to take," I said happily as I stared out of the bullhead's windows and down at the forest below as we flew towards the mountain that Beacon was built upon.